know. It's two societies.
So where do you work yourself?
I'm head of school nursing and midwifery at UniSA.
I did my undergraduate at UniSA. It was a long time ago. It was East. East, yeah.
I think we're ready.
Good morning, everyone. We're just a little bit over, so if you could take a seat quite quickly. There are some spare seats up the front for those of you who are sitting in the back. My name is Carol Gresh, and my colleague here, Karen Cullen, welcome you to what I think will be a really interesting session. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. Please make sure that your mobile phone is turned off or to silent. And just in the interest of VOC health and safety, we've only got one exit should we be required. So if we're required to evacuate, it's the back door. Okay, so I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, Associate Professor Linda Starr. Linda is a general and psychiatric qualified nurse, a lawyer, associate professor in the School of Nursing and Midwifery, and a health, law and ethics education consultant for health professionals. Her research interests have been in health law for health practitioners, criminal law, forensic health care, and elder abuse investigation. Her PhD project linked law and practice through exploring the experiences of those involved in compulsory reporting of elder abuse in Commonwealth-funded residential aged care facilities, a very topical issue at the moment. Join with me in welcoming Linda to the stage.
Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today about this topic. The interpretation of a thing, I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be about, but it was basically to leave it pretty wide open. But the suggestion was that, or some of the ideas that were put forward were issues around documentation, which suits me fine because that's something I think is really important and something I spend a lot of time looking at. So I know we've only got a very short time and I'm going to probably speak fairly quickly and go through the slides quickly, but I understand all the slides are going to be available to you, so you'll be able to have a look at the cases that we're going to have a look at, because I'm only just going to be able to give you a brief snapshot of them. To start with, I will say that I'm going to look at a number of cases. Each one of them is probably between 70 to 200 pages as a report, so you can imagine the little tiny snapshot you're going to get. And I've just picked out some issues because I think they're just so important for us to have a look at and to realise the importance of issues around our documentation as such, because it's one of the things that every practitioner does so often but does so poorly. As such. So the cases I use, some of them are local, some of them are topical, one being in the media this week, so I think we need to recognise the fact that there may well be people in this room who have been associated or touched in some way by those cases. But I always say in all the times when I talk about this stuff, there by the grace of God go I. I think there's so many things that we see other practitioners have done and there's been an adverse outcome that's been followed up some way in a judicial authority where we could sit back and think, well, I've done that myself. In that regard, and that I think highlights all the more importance about how we should be looking at what it is that we do and how we support it through documentation. So to start with, I've just put up here the law itself is evolving about regulating practice. This is generally the type of law the areas of law that all of our practice is governed by. So no surprises there. There's a whole range of places that we can have a look at. Standards from registration bodies, national associations and local service providers is really important. And one of the things that I've noticed that's coming through coroner's reports, particularly in the last 5 years, is an acknowledgement of how poorly we understand what local policy is and how that we actually actually interpret it and use it. And it certainly is something that's really important and has been linked to significant adverse outcomes, because had we followed the policy, it's arguable that the outcome might never have happened. So I've got here, how can the law impact on nursing practice? I understand that we've got a multidisciplinary audience here, but it doesn't matter if it's nursing practice, medical practice, allied health or whatever, or midwifery for that matter. It's all the same. We're all governed by the same principles. It's just that the focus and the standards of our particular discipline and the specialisation with our discipline is what will have a bit of a different time. So the contemporary issues that are happening on our health arena and impact upon nursing actions and healthcare practitioner actions that can affect patient care. And what's really important, I think, is public trust. If you think yourself, how well do you trust healthcare professionals? If you were to become a vulnerable person, to put yourself in the hands of a healthcare organisation, do you have 100% trust in everybody that you're going to meet? As such, and that I think is something that we need to think about. And I'm going to show you some media clips, just a couple of them. I'd love to spend an hour just doing a media analysis of what the public might think of us through the media. But when you have a look at some of the stuff that goes through the media, it's no surprise, in fact, that the public are losing some faith in what it is that we do and how things happen. Very good example at the moment is how many people are really confident about my health record and the security of private data. And when we see the things that go through the media about the breaches of data, for whatever reason that we know might be behind them, the public image is that they are vulnerable to such breaches. So we've got the changing times of privacy and electronic records. I'll give you a couple of slides about that. The culture in nursing and in healthcare, fatigue, increased demands and expectations, and a variation of the skill of the workforce. And that's something else that's coming through the reports. There's a recognition. At last, we're finding people saying that recognise understaffed fatigue of healthcare professionals has contributed to poor decision making. The pubic image of health professionals. I'm glad this is a... Now, nobody picked that up here, or I didn't see anyone pointing to say, look at that slide there, so need some editorial work there. But again, about the public image of the health professionals, change in practice, the turf wars. We've got the current one going on between the obstetricians and the midwives. In regards to alternative practices, and of course the current one between medical officers and the nursing profession in regards to prescribing, which also has now extended to pharmacists. And so we've got a whole range of issues about the sliding scope of practice. What is collaborative practice? Is it just extending someone's scope, shifting the boundaries of who can do what and whatever? The diminishing collegiality we have. Bullying is something that, I must admit, when I started nursing in 1970s, I would never have thought, unless I was very naive, that we would see bullying in the healthcare system. But wherever we turn now, there is an incidence of it somewhere. We are finding now there are cases coming through where nurses have been successful in bullying claims. An example is a director of nursing in Queensland who just won $1.4 million in damages for when her CEO when Queensland Health failed to intervene in her complaints about being bullied as such. So it's got to such a level that we're now getting a body of case law around it. And then what I'm going to really be concentrating on is forgetting the basics, just the 101 of documentation and what we aren't doing. So all of these kind of things, and that's what I mean about the 101, is so basic, but the adverse outcomes can be so devastating to the person and the people involved and the practitioners as well. And they don't ever really see that through the headlines. We get all these scandalous headlines that come through the media. The increasing number of fake practitioners. We've got fake nurses, fake doctors, fake chiropractors, fake pharmacists, fake psychologists, fake psychiatrists. You go on and on and on in regards to the number of practitioners who don't have any qualifications behind them, and that really grabs the attention of people. Issues around sexual boundaries, issues about crimes in the profession where healthcare professionals are stealing, and of course, the ultimate when we have people who murder patients intentionally so, not just withholding treatment or whatever, and claims about that. With the latest case we have in Australia is the registered nurse in Ballina who murdered two people in a nursing home because she found out they reported her bad behaviour to the director of nursing. So she stewed overnight and thought, right, that'll be the last time you'll make a report about somebody. And the next day she went in and overdosed them both with insulin and caused their death. She got caught because she bragged about it. And then, some of these people aren't that smart. And then we've got the issue around social media. So we have this one here in regards to the nurse at Flinders Medical Centre who videoed a patient and put it up on her Facebook page, and also a whole lot of selfies in that regards. And so she's been convicted in that offence. But because we can, it happens, and this is not isolated. The misuse of social media generally in the public, of course, is out there, but we're talking here about healthcare professionals, is ongoing. So other things about documentation, and again with the social media, inquest in the death of Stephen Herzig. You might be familiar with that one. That was the gentleman who, for some reason, somehow had the oxygen connected to his catheter. But the dissatisfying issue in that particular case on documentation is that the nurse, one of the nurses involved, logged on, but argued that she did not document the documentation that was in it. So it highlights the fact, if we read that particular case, it's got some very good points in there about the failure to follow health policy, and it really is a clear breach of SA health policy to log on and not log off and allow someone else to log on. It left the coroner position to say, well, we've got these entries, we've got you saying you haven't done it, we've got you saying you said the student might have done it or another nurse might have done it, because this is what happens, but we've got no one coming forward to say who actually did it. So from that perspective, it really was a critical issue in the case. Issues about bullying in the workplace. Again, I'm just highlighting this as for these kind of things as issues that happen in the workplace, but also have some link to documentation. So Sheila Himes is a very interesting case. I'd suggest you go and have a look at it for a number of reasons, but one of the things about it was that it was alleged that Dr. Koski clearly intimidated the nursing staff in the hospital to the point that they were in fear when they disobeyed his order and with his response to them, because he ordered large, frequent doses of midazolam and morphine, which they believed the patient didn't need because they were so drowsy she didn't know what they were given her. So they never gave it. But then his response to that was that they, as I said, were intimidated and continued to give it, and she died. You will have to read the case to find out the full details, because we can't talk about that here because of our time issue. But a review into his conduct and having experts have a look at his notes, that's when they picked up the fact that there was something wrong. So she had been long buried, and there was no chance to do toxicology or anything else. So the outcome of that was the questioning of why did these nursing staff just blindly go along and give this medication when clearly there was no indication for it. But although I always go on about how you must have good, sound, accurate, consistent, complete documentation that's comprehensive, in this case, this is his poor documentation allowed him to get away with it. Because, in fact, there was absolutely no evidence in the case notes that could make it conclusive one way or the other, and that was with the palliative care team, the coroner's squad and the homicide squad all looking at the case notes said that there was insufficient information on his part to be able to get any proof beyond reasonable doubt about what happened. Not that I think that's a good tip for you to say, okay, the less I write, the better, because that's not what I mean, but it is a case. But it also highlights that fact about the culture that we've got, about where are we as patient advocates if we are going to be so intimidated and fail to act when somebody is actually bullying in the workplace to that extent. Another one I just want to highlight about electronic records, or the misuse of electronic records. This was a Queensland case where this medical officer, it is alleged, stalked his wife who had left him through following her through her electronic records. She left him in Brisbane, or Nambour, and went to Brisbane, and he followed her through. The day she showed up for her first chemotherapy, he was there on the doorstep at the right time, following through her electronic record exactly what was happening to her. So again, it just highlights the risks that there are out there in regards to the access and availability of information should people misuse that, and how we should be alert to the fact that this could happen. So I've mentioned that one. Good, that 15 minutes goes so quickly. So now in 5 minutes I'm going to have to really rush through the rest of the stuff, which I will do so, highlighting the fact that what we need to be thinking about in documentation sometimes is outside the square. So the need to develop a forensic lens. So this has happened in 1999. There was an inquest into the death of William Hester. This was a gentleman who was alleged a bolus dose of morphine was given in intensive care, and that is arguable, could have killed the patient, but there was no observations done because this person was expected to die. So the question was, did the bolus dose kill him, or did the original gunshot injury that he went in for kill him? So that was open. But there was a lot of questions there about the failure to collect evidence, protect the crime scene, etc., etc. The same things recently happened in the death of Mavis Baum. That was the one where one elderly resident murdered another one in the nursing home. So have a look at those because, again, I haven't got time to go through the cases, but it's about a failure to recognise that what's a clinical scene has become a crime scene, and then how we then preserve it, the documentation, the evidence we should collect and the documentation we should make. Now, the next case is the inquest into the death of Christopher Hammett, the inquest into the death of Judith Knight, Robert Atkins, Graham, Barry Gulliver, and a couple of others, all are around the failure to identify the deteriorating patient in that regards. So all of these particular cases, you will see that the nursing staff in various ways had failed through the failure to take observations or take them and fail to record them, and sometimes failed to record them in the case notes, sometimes failed to record them on the appropriate tool which would raise alert for a MET call, all led to the failure of an opportunity for medical review for these patients. Every one of these patients that I've mentioned on the rest of these slides were otherwise kind of fit and healthy and were expected to be discharged, and they all died, and in every one of them the coroner come to the conclusion that these people ought not to have died in those circumstances, or not at all. So one of the things about it was a loss of chance for medical review. Another one, reluctance to call medical staff. This happens so often, I hear about it from people, and clearly there are statements that you can read in these three cases. The inquest into the death of John William Ryan is another one, same thing. Sportsmed went in for a joint replacement, ought to have been discharged, and was not. 53 he was, and the rest you can see here. The culture that is around where nursing staff believe that they are not able to call medical staff for whatever reason, and these are just some of the quotes out of these particular cases, clearly lead to no appropriate intervention. Lack of knowledge and skill in all of the cases again, and something I was surprised about, but particularly because all these cases are pretty much on the same theme in regards to a failure to recognise the effect of opioids on the respiratory system, particularly in patients with special needs or particularly vulnerable patients, and a lack of communication about them. So it's not just one patient, it's not two patients, it's about 7 patients in the coroner's inquest that I've tried to include in this slide, all the same thing, not just in South Australia, New South Wales and Queensland, but other cases as well. To me, I was thinking it seemed to be a fairly basic thing, that we would have an understanding about that, but clearly it's not. And as you can read, or you will read in these cases, the coroner has come through saying that it's very clear that the nursing staff, it was beyond the level of skill and knowledge of these staff to look after these post-op patients, which again is a question. Absence of written directions, and again there was verbal orders but no written orders, so the nursing staff, who were inexperienced in some cases, didn't have a background to actually measure it against what ought I be doing. Failure to follow policy and protocols. Now, there's a mixture of things here. Failure to follow it. Sometimes people thought there was a policy where, in fact, there was none. It was just a cultural belief turned into a subjective reconstruction that this is a policy. When it came down to it, there was no policy in that regards. So that's another one to look at. And again, just more quotes about failing and the coroner's view in that regards, about failing to follow the protocols, failing to document. I've also mentioned that. But the final point there, I think there can be no excuse for nurses not to accurately record observations of all vital signs on the radar observation chart. It's a basic task that requires only diligence and accuracy. And I think that's so true in that regards. It's something that is, I think, it probably taken for granted sometimes because we might think of it as being so basic. And just more quotes again about failing to do that. The value of progress notes and handover sheets. Thing there, we're too busy to read the progress notes. We haven't got time for that. We just go on the handover sheet. And again, that was criticised, saying that every person ought to have the time or make the time to read the progress notes, because that's where you're going to get the total picture. Failing to document in that means that your colleagues are not going to have the opportunity to get the total picture, so you're impacting on their ability to provide good care by failing to do that. And the recommendation from the coroner in one of these points is to say that if you haven't got time to read case notes, it's a resource issue that needs to be addressed by SA Health. Inquest, again, must have the skills to recognise. Equally important is workplace culture. Action needed there in this regards into this particular case. And Robert Atkins' recent coronial inquiry. After this event occurred, things have been put in place. A 2017 audit showed that only 10% of patients were identified as having failed escalation of care. And I think alarmingly, it's noted that the frequency of observations and a response to an abnormal finding was only observed in 45% of patients, even after this incident and revised of protocols. So at the end of the day, the success of any set of protocols is entirely dependent on the diligence and competency of those who are able to apply them, and that's the same. If you've got a policy, you need to be able to use it. So I'm nearly at the end. At this point, I'm just looking to think if retirement is what you're thinking of, because, we often think it all gets too hard. We know we're busy and we know that you're busy, everything's hard, there's a lot of expectations upon you. I like this quote out of what the coroner said in Robert Atkins' statement. He is directing this at nursing staff, but I think any health professional should take heart in it. At the end of the day, the medical and nursing staff of public hospitals are the people to whom South Australian public place their trust. Nursing staff play a particularly important role because they are the eyes and the ears of the ward. The nurses are the ones who see and speak with patients throughout the day. Without the appropriate level of knowledge, training and experience, they are well placed to make observations that can save a life. The importance of their role and skills cannot be overstated, but they must be supported and appropriately trained to competently discharge that role. So I think after all the things that happened in that case, all the failures, the missed opportunities and for a statement like that, for the recognition of the value of the healthcare staff in what it is they do, I think is really important. So I think as a result of these cases, although I've just given you a really rushed overview of it, is our challenge: what changes can we make individually and collectively in our various disciplines to prevent further examples of failing to manage deteriorating patients, and how can we improve the practice of basic knowledge and skill levels across all disciplines so that the very important things that are just the basic things we do every day are actually seen as being important and are acted on appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Just in the importance of keeping to time, if people have questions for Linda, would you be happy to take them at the break? Thank you.
Our next speaker is